Hey, how's it going, guys? I'm going to do a quick video showing the breakdown of the 3D Chameleon. This is going to cover basically replacing some parts in here. Not always prone to failure, but just to cover some useful tips for people that need to tear theirs down and how to rebuild it. So it's pretty simple. So this is what it looks like when it's taken off of all the mounts. You're going to have these base plates in here. This is going to hold basically the primary gears inside. This is basically the shifting mechanism that changes the gearing. So I'm just going to take off these top screws here. And this top plate will come off. Pretty straightforward, really. Just like that. And then so each of these can be separated from the motor. So these are going to each have two of the PTFE tubings coming out of them, along with the bearings inside. That's going to help feed the filament through. Something to keep note of is the driver motor that drives the filament has this spacer. Mine's obviously a different color because I've had mine torn apart a few times now, just for trying to learn everything about the machine and whatnot. This spacer is very important, so you want to make sure you keep yours on here. I'll make sure to link I'll make sure to put a link in the description for this file if you happen to lose yours. And then this is the gear selector motor. This just basically changes which filament is going against the feeder, which helps choose which color is being printed. So, some helpful things to have on hand. Obviously, a screwdriver. I like to use these little phone spudger tools. This just kind of helps to pull this apart. One thing to note is make sure you're careful when trying to separate this, as there are very tiny springs in here. I've actually had to order some replacements because I've launched mine across the room, which doesn't really help if you can't find them. So yeah, we're going to tear this open. Mine actually is warped. I had some pretty bad bed adhesion, so some of mine just didn't hold together very well. I think I've been having some issues with filament changes because of this. So I just wanted to go and print off some new pieces. When you get yours brand new, you'll have some really nice quality printed out versions. They fit together much better. The only thing with those is that they have brass couplings on them, which, let me see, here we go. They'll have these little brass couplings on them, which they're good, but they just are kind of a pain. And especially if you trim this too short, like you can see how short this one is, I trimmed it too much. You would have to replace the brass bushing or brass couplings, whatever you want to call them. So it's just easier with this new file. This file has ridges in it, which allow you to cut the PTFE tubing with this piece here. Pretty straightforward. You just insert the PTFE tubing into the cutter, slide it up to this notch here, or you can actually pull all the way through, which is what I typically do. Then you just take your little blade, and then you just cut along the shape of it. So you just cut straight down essentially. You cut at the angle here, and then you just pick the little pieces off, and you do that on each 4 pieces. And then once I get this open, I'll show you what that looks like when it's cut open. Again, when you're taking yours apart, make sure to be careful with it. Mine is already ruined, so I'm not even going to really try to be gentle, but you just want to make sure you don't lose any of your pieces here. One thing to note is making sure your printer has pretty tight printing specs. Otherwise, some of this is going to be really hard to fit together, and then it's just going to make it a lot harder to reassemble. I don't know if you can tell in the pictures, but there's slight notches in the PTFE tubing, and so like I said, that just helps sit down in the grooves here that have these little ridges, I guess, and it just makes for installing them much easier. So on the inside of each piece where the filament extrudes to, you'll have these little pieces. These are tensioners, and basically what these do is they increase the amount of tension that's put on the springs, which in hand increases the amount of force essentially used to feed the filament through. So the tighter these are, the harder it pushes against the filament, and then when the selector moves over to a certain position, the drive gear will push against this, and then the filament will be in there. So if it's too loose, you might have problems with it extruding. If it's too tight, then it's obviously going to get stuck and not feed very well. So you want to find a nice balance. The default ones are pretty good. Mine are +2. It's all kind of up to preference, really. So after that, you got your bearings here. They just come off like that. And then you'll have also 2 other tension pieces underneath. These ones you want to make sure you're careful with. As I said, there are springs and they tend to pop out. What I like to do is I like to push down on it and just slowly flick it up. Just like that. Springs will come loose. And then yeah, it's pretty simple. I'm going to reuse these tension sliders, going to reuse the bearings, going to reuse the springs, and I'm just going to reassemble it in this new, hopefully not deformed version. Looks like the bed adhesion was pretty good on this one, so I shouldn't have any problems. So yeah, so install is pretty simple. There's these little tiny like notches in here, if you can tell. Basically you want to set the springs into those little notches. They are a little bit picky sometimes. If you have a pair of like really nice tweezers, you can kind of like line them up in there. I'm not sure where mine are, so I'm not even going to bother, but yeah, so you basically get the springs in there. Just like that. You want to take your tensioner, and then there's these little ridges. So that's basically where the springs are going to sit. So you're just going to take that, put the springs in place. If we can get them to stay still. I'm going to find my tweezers, make this a little bit easier. Alright, so when you have the springs, you kind of get them in place here. They're a little bit finicky, so you kind of have to like hold them at an angle almost. You want to take your little piece and you just plop it in there just like that. Pretty simple actually, nothing too complicated. And then you're going to do the same thing on the other side. Just like that. One thing to note is the pieces are labeled. So this is a C piece. This is going to be the bottom side. And then you're going to have your B piece. It looks exactly the same. This one just sits on top. The only difference is you don't put the springs on this side. It's only on the bottom piece. And then same thing. Like I said, kind of hold it at an angle. That kind of helps to insert this piece in there. Just like that. And then another trick you can do is check the bottom with these little holes. You can see the springs are in there. That's how you know they're in the proper place. Then you just want to throw the bearings back on. You can slide it in there. And then you'll want to put these pieces back on top, making sure that the same piece with the little ridges facing outward towards the springs, just like so. Boom. Simple as that. Then you want to take your PTFE tubes, and then you want to find the side that you made the notches in. And then these are simply just going to press into place, and you kind of have to push a little firmly to make sure they're on all the way. They're not going to like lock in place essentially, but they do kind of sit still. This is kind of a tedious process. This is one of my least favorite things about having to tear this thing apart. It's not too terrible, but it can be a little annoying, especially trying to hold it in place while trying to fit it back together. So kind of do something like this, and then I take my B piece, very simply just set it on top. I kind of like to start from the PTFE tube side just to kind of get it in there and hold it in place for a second. And you kind of just smush it down. You want to make sure that you're careful. You don't want to knock those tensioner pieces out of the way. So you kind of have to like finesse everything into place just like that. And then if you want, I guess you could do it this way too. You just have it kind of open a little bit on the side. Set your PTFE tubing in, kind of push it down a little bit. Rinse and repeat with the other side. Like I said, kind of a tedious process. Not the most exciting way to do this, but it helps if you have like an extra set of hands and or, you know, a vise or something to kind of hold things in place. You could probably glue these down actually. I haven't bothered, so. And then, yep, just making sure you're constantly checking for the spacing for everything. Like I said, quite a process. Might also help if you have like an edge of a desk or something to kind of like use your legs to hold them in place. If it's too big of a pain, you can always try to switch sides. Alright, now once you have it most of the way in place, it's pretty easy just to kind of push it down, and then it just kind of snaps into place. And then you want to make sure that there's not any thick gaps, so like there's a pretty big gap there still. So what I like to do is just kind of like take a pair of pliers or something and just very lightly just kind of pinch it down a little bit just to make sure it gets as closed in there as possible. Some gap is probably okay. Another thing you could do is probably take a drill bit and just drill out the holes a little bit more. As you can see, mine are a little bit like skewed. It's probably just some orientation print problems. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. Rinse and repeat for the other side. Same thing. Start the old one. Alright, just like that. And then definitely making sure you get all the little pieces pushed in together. You want it to be as tight of a gap as possible. Realistically, there shouldn't be any gap. I personally have had a hard time getting any of them rebuilt, I should say, without a gap. I think my printer tolerances are just slightly off, and maybe I just need to drill the holes out a little bit. But yeah, so once you have your two pieces assembled, you're going to go back to the drive gear and the selector gear. You can take your base piece. Mine was already, this is the original one that I came with my printer. They're still in good shape, so I didn't see any point of reprinting them. Everything in different colors you'll see. These are all stuff that I've reprinted just for personal reasons. I've been curious about how this system works, so I've torn it apart a couple times now. And broken a couple things and learned along the way, so it is what it is. So yeah, so you'll set your A piece back on there. Make sure you have the spacer included. And you want to make sure that this side, the one with these little rings here, this goes on the selector gear side. That's basically, it's set up how it changes the colors. So just kind of angle it over the first bearing here, kind of wiggle it down, and then you kind of play around with it until it just slides over the bottom one there. It's kind of tedious. You can kind of twist it a little bit to get it to slide down, just like that. And then make sure you know that the motors are facing the same direction as they plug in the same way. And then go ahead and install the next one, just like that, nice and easy. Perfect. Then you'll want to install your top base plate, just like that. Screw everything back down. Something to note when you're screwing these back down is to make sure you don't tighten them down too much. If you tighten it too much, it puts too much force on these, and it just makes it a lot harder for it to properly transition to different colors. If it's too tight, then obviously it binds, and that's just never good for anybody. So. I like to do just slightly snug, but not too snug, just like that. I'm actually going to tighten this down a little bit more. And as you can see here, I didn't push it down all the way, so I'm going to actually take this back apart to readjust this. Can be kind of finicky. It's a tedious process of this, but ultimately for what it is, I think it could be a lot worse. This one's not sitting down all the way, so I'm going to have to adjust the PTFE tubes a little bit. Obviously not the proper tool for this, but you know, that's what it is. I think one of the PTFE tubes got stuck somehow, so I may need to pull this apart real quick. Gotta be a little more gentle with this one, as this one is obviously the new one that I printed, so I don't want it to break. Luckily this little spider tool makes life a lot easier. A little less force required to pry this up. Yeah, as you can see, the tension sliders weren't exactly aligned up in there properly, which was probably not helping with it closing. Make sure everything's nice and aligned in there. Okay. There we go. It's closed up much better now. Way smaller of a gap, so shouldn't have any problems with that now. Just make sure you hit all those sides, get everything nice and smoothed out. Perfect. Toss that back on there finally. Yeah, much better. Alright. Live and you learn. These can be a little bit tedious to try to thread back in. Sometimes it's just slightly out of alignment, so it won't go through. You may have to kind of mess with these. Tighten, untighten. There we go. And just make sure it's not too snug. It should be a little loose still, but not too loose where it's going to come out on its own. So you want to make sure there's some wiggle room for it to thread through there. And now you got your selector gears, and they should slide fairly freely. They're going to be a little tight, which is normal. Boom. And then you just want to make sure you can kind of go back and forth like that. And then yeah, that's basically the breakdown and rebuild of the 3D Chameleon. Thanks for watching.